Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our March virtual program, Changing Course from Catalyst to Conviction at the Orange County Regional History Center. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. A warm welcome to all of our members joining us today, as well as those who may be new to SEMC. SEMC is a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 southeastern states, as well as in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of around 1,500 and continue to grow. I will take this moment to point out that we are running one last membership special next month. From April 26th to 30th, new lapsed or renewing members can take advantage of a 25% discounted rate at all membership levels. So watch our weekly e-news and social media for reminders about this special. I'm thrilled to continue our 2021 virtual program series with this talk focused on the great work being done at the Orange County Regional History Center in Orlando, Florida. Pamela Schwartz, the Executive Director, is here with us today to discuss the History Center's evolution, and I know the information she will convey will be a great addition to the Museums Cannot Be Silent series we began last fall. Before we begin, a quick thank you to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, today's program sponsor, for the significant support they have provided to SEMC over this past year to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for all to attend. A big thank you to Banks Creative for our promotional graphics, and to the many who helped us spread the word on our social media channels. A few basic housekeeping notes before I introduce our speaker. This session is being recorded and will be available on the SEMC YouTube channel by the end of the week. Closed captioning is available for today's program, or it will be shortly, and you can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen. A written transcript of today's session will also be available as soon as we can get it edited. I'm certain there will be many questions for Pam, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep track and address them at the end of the program. While this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, you're all still here, and I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. As I have said before, while the C in SEMC stands for conference, it also stands for community, and it's so nice to see all of you here now. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Pamela Schwartz, who has been with the Orange County Regional History Center for the past 6 years. She was appointed Executive Director earlier this month after serving for the last 5 years as Chief Curator. In her role as Chief Curator, Pam directed the creation of the History Center's award-winning traveling exhibitions, and her team also developed the current landmark exhibition, Yesterday, This Was Home, the Ocoee Massacre of 1920. In the wake of the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, she was the architect of the Urgent Response One Orlando Collection Initiative and has become a national authority on historical collecting after community tragedy. Pam has nearly 20 years of museum and consulting experience as a director, curator, and designer. And before joining the Orange County Regional History Center, she served as the executive director at Boone County Historical Society in Iowa from 2012 to 2016. Pam has a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and Public Relations from the University of Northern Iowa and a Master of Arts in Museum Professions from Seton Hall University. I've been following Pam's work for many years, and she has spoken at SEMC annual meetings, as well as written articles for Inside SEMC. The work that has been accomplished related to the Pulse exhibitions and One Orlando collection has been recognized with multiple SEMC awards. I've personally been inspired by all that she has accomplished at Orange County, as well as her passion and commitment to inclusivity and moving our field forward. In a recent conversation about potential topics for this program and the pace of change within museums, Pam said, "Principles and ethics should never change. It is consistent dedication to and application of those things to situations that are constantly in motion that drive us forward." Please welcome Pamela Schwartz.
Hi, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to this program. I Definitely thank Zinnia and for the sponsors that are supporting this program and for all of you joining us. I do really want to just reiterate that I encourage you to use the chat box, converse and share questions, and we'll hope to get to as many of those as we can at the end. So I would like to just share a little bit about our museum's journey and our staff's journey. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let me get organized. Hopefully everybody can see that. Zinnia can let me know if it's not the case. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about, great, good, about creating change in museums from catalyst to conviction, how a sort of a reason or reason for something happening becomes just something that's part of our built mechanisms and our systems. As Zinnia said, I started at the History Center about 5 years ago. I came to this institution in February of 2016 as its chief curator. And the main thing that I was going to be tasked with doing was not only overseeing the entire collections and exhibitions departments, but looking at our new master plan. So the idea was that all of our permanent exhibitions were some 20 years old and were in grave need of updating. And so going into that process, when I came here, it was to do that. It was to redesign an institution, which I thought was really exciting. To share a little bit about my perceptions of what the institution was when I took the position versus what I realized after I was in the position were different. And I think most of you who've ever changed jobs can sort of realize that looking at a website, reading about an institution, going through the interview process, you have one view of a museum or an institution. And then once you get there, you see things are maybe sometimes different. And the way that I came to understand our institution in my first few months, the institution was going through a very dynamic audit. There were some things going on that needed to be addressed. Our museum and its collection was largely based on white, affluential, cis male narratives. That's not to say we didn't have any other stories presented, but it was largely in one direction. Nobody had really heard of our museum. Many people were constantly surprised to know that there was a history museum downtown in that old courthouse building. Again, I mentioned the exhibits were some 20 years old, and they looked it and they read that way as well. A lot changes. We did bring in traveling exhibitions, but they were mostly of a nationally traveling, and rarely did we really take the time to make them very mission centric or to add a sort of local version to those stories. Our museum had seen about a 90% turnover rate in a few years, in that almost all of the staff was brand new when I came in. And the staff that we're filtering in, and this is a really important part of this entire program, is that the staff that we're filtering in had a different belief system than what had existed before. Our new folks were interested in working with communities instead of this perception of working for them and giving them what they need or what we believe they need, rather than trying to be the sort of academic expert. We were now sort of wanting to embrace the community and work with them. So we began really to endeavor to diversify our collections, diversify our stories, meet new partners and collaborators before we hit our first bout of chaos, if you will. This is just a brief overview of our 5 years. And when I say I talk about my entire staff. Again, at this point, we've now seen about a 99% change. So in 5 years, almost all of our staff, except for 1 or 2 people, are brand new. So February 2016, I come, new job, new state, new me. I'm just excited, invigorated. We're going to do all this cool stuff. And what I found was a bit of a brick wall for all those reasons I just mentioned. A museum that had not changed much. In a governmental, we're a public-private nonprofit partnership, so we're partially funded and governed by Orange County government, and we're partially funded and governed by a nonprofit historical society board. So there's some interesting dynamics there. I, along with most of the staff, were outsiders to the community. We were just learning it. I didn't know Central Florida history, and I had no built-in partnerships. June 2016, so just about a few months later, the Pulse nightclub shooting happens. September 2017, Hurricane Irma hits much of the South, right? But rips open the roof on our collection storage facility. 2020-21 sees a global pandemic. 2020 sees the 100th year remembrance of the Ocoee Massacre, which is a local event that happened here. I'll talk more about in a little bit. And 2021 is the 5-year remembrance already of that Pulse nightclub shooting. So these are some big moments. These are some catalysts to recreating ourselves, adapting ourselves, changing our trajectories. So I want to talk a little bit about those different events that we've sort of come into and up against. But I also want to look at them through the lens of what we learned and how we attacked them, right? I think that's really why we're all here, is trying to figure out, how do we sustainably change our institutions? Where does that change start? What does it look like? These are some of the things, when I think about all of that things that we've been through, what was most important in the progress that we made, or what did we see every single time one of these events happen? So leading and taking responsibility, plan, mobilize, communicate, ask for input, be nimble and adapt, and serve your people. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is I'm going to take each of those catalysts, each of those items that I just mentioned, and move you through these different ideas towards conviction, and how our reaction is now just part of the built-in system of our museum when events happen, when opportunities arise, when difficulties arise. So you'll sort of see how that's going to work, and I hope that it makes clear sense. So about 4 months after I started with the History Center, the Pulse nightclub shooting happened. I would assume most of you are somewhat familiar with that event, but as a broad overview, early in the early hour morning of the morning, 49 individuals were murdered at a local gay nightclub. One perpetrator. I woke up that morning, and like everyone in the community, we were sort of reeling. This is a mile from my house, a mile from where I work. And, you know, the first thought, of course, is the staff safe? Is anybody I know impacted? I was not familiar with this site because I only lived here for a few months at this point. I hardly knew anybody but my staff. I thought about trying to donate blood. I had just done that a week or two before. There was clearly plenty of water being donated. What role was it that I could play in my community? And so as a historian, I just thought to myself, this is major. This is going to change us. At the time I had these thoughts, the death toll was only at half. And I say only, because 25 is only. But sat down and started writing a plan. I thought about the mothers who were looking for their children and the stories they would tell. I thought about the memorials that were going to arise, and people leaving flowers and posters, and just sat down and started writing. And what became of that was a 5-page sort of starter collecting plan to the One Orlando Collection Initiative, as it became known. And the next morning I went to my staff, which at the time was only 4 of us. We were incredibly short-staffed. I mean, we had more people on our staff, but the people who really did this work and sort of coalesced around the One Orlando Collection were 4 people. It was myself, our curator of exhibitions, our research librarian, and our collections manager, all incredible people who gave their heart and soul to this project. And we stood, I remember just standing at a cubicle, and I said, here are my thoughts. Should we do this? And I think all of us were just grasping for that same thing, is what was our role? This is obviously important. And so it gave us all not only a purpose for ourselves, but a purpose for our community. And so we sort of set the wheels into motion. Fast forward through a lot. It wasn't easy to get permission to collect after Pulse. We were dealing with politics. We were dealing with at the time, no longer, unfortunately, but at the time, the largest mass shooting. This was not this collecting initiative was not planned. It was not budgeted. We were very short-staffed. And so the important thing for us to do was just to sit down and communicate with one another, to come up with a plan, to brainstorm, just to have a conversation about all of the ways that this could look or could go. And also not neglecting the fact that we had no inroads into this community. You'll recall my saying that we were a very white, cis male heterosexual sort of narrative in our museum and our collection. We had agreed to do an exhibition in February already of our local LGBTQ history, and had come to the realization that we had nothing representing this community. We did not have oral histories with this community. And so this was starting from scratch, and it was not easy. But, you know, going out, and we collected at the memorial sites. You'll see the photograph on the right. We did collect items from inside of the nightclub once we were able to do so. All in all, we still do something pulse related in our museum every single day. We are working currently on the 5-year Remembrance exhibition, and we made a plan. We mobilized around it. We communicated a lot with one another, and what has resulted is we've done an annual exhibition each year. We have, you know, this project did win a variety of national awards, just in terms of the model, unfortunately, that it has created for others who continue to go through this, most recently Boulder and Atlanta, and our colleagues there, and thoughts with them. And the collection is some over 12,500 objects. You know, we could give an entire presentation on just this collecting endeavor, and have done so, and are happy to answer questions about that. But it really outlines our sort of step one. This work taught us an organic and different way to work with our community. While we were literally down on the site collecting, people came up to us and said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And we told them. We educated people that we're a museum and we're preserving this history. Well, how does that work? And people were very curious about this behind the scenes. It wasn't just this sort of pristine exhibition that people were coming to. It was actually getting to see the processes behind it. And we connected with people. Talking to one person at the memorial site was the gateway to 4 survivors, 2 families of victims, and a first responder, because everybody was just so together and meeting during this time. Lead and take responsibility. Our institution was really the best suited institution locally to preserve this history. There were a lot of institutions that were interested in helping and assisting, but maybe didn't either have the staff resources or necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for? The perseverance. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but we really went full steam ahead. This is the day that we went to collect inside of the club. And I'll talk a little bit more about staff health and safety later, but if you want to do good history, you've got to lead that process, and you've got to take responsibility for what that means in terms of your collection. Now, none of us should work beyond our own resources and our capacities, but there's a constant reevaluation process to what that actually looks like. You have to believe in what you're doing. And I won't lie, this was not an 8 to 5 job for us. None of us worked an 8 to 5 day for months. We were on a 6 a.m. to 6 or 8 p.m. schedule, and some of us till 2 or 3 in the morning. You have to decide what's right for you, what's right for everything that you're doing, of course, and taking care of yourself. But we believed in the project that it wasn't just a job. It just wasn't a job for us. We come through Pulse. We're preserving the items, cataloging the items, collecting at the sites has slowed down. We've done our 1-year memorial exhibition, and we've learned a lot about working with our community. We've met so many new people in our Latinx community, in our gay community. We've done oral histories. We do biographical oral histories. So it wasn't just talking to people about Pulse. When they came, we invited them to speak about their whole life. We would like to get the context. Why were you at Pulse? You can understand somebody's existence and feelings about Pulse unless you know their background. And sometimes the most fascinating stories we talk to people about had little to do with Pulse. It had to do with some other era in their life that opened this whole new possibility about Central Florida's history for us. So we did a lot, and we continued that work. Hurricane Irma hit in 2017, and this is just a little view about what it did to our collections facility. Now, it might be hard to see from the the space here, but I'm sure many of you can identify with taking in a large collection, and that, you know, it's not always an ideal situation. You're in the middle of processing things. We have different things laid out, different tables. You'll see some items don't fit on a table. And so in order to properly clean them and conserve them, we have to have them on the floor. It just wasn't ideal. The pulse stuff came in by the thousands. And so there wasn't always a good place to go with it. Well, when the hurricane hit, those were the items most impacted. The particular section of our storage facility that was most impacted was where we were staging the pulse items to be housed. This was traumatizing for the staff to walk in and see this. I broke curfew to go out and check the site after the hurricane. And I had a bad feeling, and it was just a horrific experience. And walking in to see this, honestly, I just stood there and I didn't really know what to do. And we way back in that right-hand picture, you can see my partner. He had come out with me in terms of just safety's sake. I had waded through hip deep water, essentially thigh deep water, to get to the site. And he just grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, "You need to call your people. I'm going to start cleaning up." And it was probably 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and we stayed till midnight or 1. And we just started trying to take care of it and triage. And it was all about planning and mobilizing and just reacting. You don't really have a choice here. Asking for input. You can plan for an emergency all you want, and you can have an emergency response manual and you can follow it, but it never fully fits the bill of what you're dealing with. Never neglect where your best ideas may come from. Sometimes we think about, oh, I'm going to talk to this expert in my collections department or this expert. And sometimes you don't know. By the time of the hurricane, our staff had grown some. These are the staff members who came out that night. This is us going back to our cars from the flooded parking lot and just trying to figure out, you know, what do we do? Who do we call? Okay, so we'll call the insurance people, and we'll call risk, and we'll call whatever. And the blonde here in the middle, she started as a volunteer and was hired as a One Orlando staff to work solely with the Pulse collections. And she was doing an online master's degree, and she goes, "You know what? I think one of my professors is part of that Heritage Emergency Response group. I could reach out to her. Do you think she could help?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And so she put us in touch, and they had somebody come over from Tampa to help us start doing conservation and things. And we sometimes get so caught up in our own issues, it's hard to reach out to our colleagues and see who can help and how they can help. And so asking for input from everybody in your institution can lead you to very positive and helpful things. So we were constantly communicating, not only with this small group who was doing the work, but also those of the people back at the ranch holding down the fort. And that was the same case with Pulse. The 4 of us were out doing the field collecting. We sometimes got our best ideas and thoughts from the individuals that maybe previously we would have thought least likely to offer those pieces. Being nimble and adapting. This is, I think, the hardest thing for museums. I think it has a lot to do with our histories, has to do with our governance structures, especially in our case where we're governed by the county government. Because with bureaucracy, things don't seem to happen too terribly quickly, as we've all experienced to some extent. But we've managed to sort of work through that. And by reacting to Pulse and reacting to the hurricane and reacting, it's starting to build into our process. These are just some of the big headlines after some of the work that we have done. Our museum never expected to see itself in the New York Times, let alone alongside an institution like the Smithsonian. But it was just a lot of hard work and care, commitment and conviction and courage that it took for us. It wasn't easy, you know, when you're trying to react and adapt and do what's best, and your governance structure is looking at you saying, "No, it's too political. We're not going to touch that," or "No, we can't do this." Sometimes it can be really difficult to work through some of that. So again, trying to move from these sort of hard decisions to having it just be part of our built response. This whole conversation probably gives some people who are very risk adverse nightmares. But again, these things give me courage, and they give me the conviction. The conviction, I think, is the hard part. Is if you can truly believe in what you're doing, it makes the work and the difficult parts that much easier. One thing I've recommended to a site recently, we've been working with some of the sites who most recently had mass tragedies in their communities, was that we can sometimes get so bogged down in how to respond that we don't respond at all, because we aren't nimble and we don't just have the conversations and try to figure it out. So I always say that an imperfect response is better than no response, because sometimes it's just comes too late. Fast forward, I'm going through all of this really quickly. Please do leave questions. We've been through Pulse, and a lot of it wasn't just Pulse. It wasn't just this big thing. This started to get infused into every exhibition we were doing. Is should we do research and write this exhibit, or should we call the people who lived this history? Right? Or should we have advisory councils of different people from around the community that might have good ideas for us, or different things? It started to just continue to change the way we were working with our community. When COVID started to creep into the United States, of course, one of my first thoughts is, oh, this is coming. What are we going to do as an institution? How are we going to keep our people safe? And there's probably going to be things to collect. And I didn't even get words out of my mouth before I had a staff member standing in my doorway saying, are we going to have a meeting to talk about this? Because it's in the United States and it's only a matter of time before it gets here. And so, there's going to be, and I'm like, okay, slow down. Let's do that. Let's call a meeting. And so it wasn't my idea. It wasn't coming from a top-down decree. A lot of this, it's a two-way street, right? There's good ideas always throughout your entire institution, and it doesn't really matter who comes up with the idea or who owns it. It's that everyone sits down to have that conversation. Is it important? Can we do it? Should we do it, right? There's different questions to sort of ask yourself as you move more into this active, reactive, both model. So in the case of COVID collecting, we did. One of the first things we did was we put a submittal site up on our website because we knew people were going to be at home and interacting digitally. So preserve your own story and send it to us, because we can't come and find you right now. Different things that we sought out. Take, for instance, this photograph on the right, which is, if you're a Disney fan, is kind of bananas. It's Disney, empty. Something none of us have ever seen before. But we had to be nimble. We can't go sit in a room with people and do an oral history right now. But for anybody who does oral history, that it can be really hard to get interviews, to schedule interviews, to actually do the interviews. And the more time passes, sometimes the harder it is to get an oral history, sometimes the easier it is. The bottom screen, you'll see one of our oral historians, Dan. One of the first people we connected with was somebody who was essentially held captive on one of the cruise ships, and she was local. We saw this, like 4 people removed, somehow connected to this individual. Again, you never know who your staff know and what ideas they have. But we did the oral history over Zoom because we wanted to make sure we captured it sort of in the thick. And we'll probably go back and do another oral history with this person now that time has elapsed. But we just had to adapt. We all got sent home. Not everybody had a laptop. Not everybody had a microphone. Not everybody. We just had to keep adapting and trying to figure out how to make it work. And so by putting up this portal where people could sort of self-submit rather than us having to go to them, doing Zoom oral histories, it's an imperfect solution, but it's moving progress forward. And it's allowing us to be an active part of our community's experience throughout this event that we're all collectively experiencing. Our most recent exhibition actually closes this Sunday. It's called Yesterday This Was Home, the Ocoee Massacre of 1920s, again mentioned. A little background on this event or on this exhibition. I won't go into the full history. We do have more information on our website. If you're interested, ask questions. This exhibit centered around the Koi Massacre. You've likely heard of Tulsa or Rosewood. This is a somewhat similar event that happened in 1920. A black gentleman tried to vote. And by the end of the evening, the entire community he was from, the entire black portion of the community he was from, much of it had been burned to the ground. A man had been lynched. 3 others had been burned to death. An unknown number of people in total died. He was run out of town. And over the ensuing years, that entire black community of more than 360 acres of property had been taken or sold at much too low prices. And those properties would be worth well over $10 million today if those individuals still had them. So this exhibition talks about that night in Ocoee. Most people living in Ocoee today have no idea that this racially motivated massacre happened there 100 years ago. In fact, 20 years ago, a community group came to our museum and asked us to do an exhibition, and we turned them down. I'll let you consider all the reasons why that might have been, but we turned them down and refused to touch it. We were a governmentally run institution in a community where there is a legacy of, at the time of this, the 1920s, most of the politicians, the mayors, the police officers, the sheriffs were part of the Ku Klux Klan. 20 years later, 17 years later, about 3 years ago, that same community group came to us to donate their archives and their research and asked if we would do an exhibition. And we said, absolutely. It's 100 years too late. And as we were considering this exhibit about this event, when a community burns to the ground and people flee, how do you build an exhibit? There's no stuff. Is this something that just sort of is an accident? Is it something that just happens here? No. There's something that allows the conditions to form to make something like this happen. So we looked at the Ocoee Massacre, and there's both very little information out there about this event, but also a ton of misinformation. And we started to do the research, and we said, what are the first sort of the genesis of this massacre? And we kept backing up in the timeline. We kept backing up. We got all the way back to enslavement. In St. Augustine in 1526, the first, Africans who were forcibly brought to this country, to Florida, with the Spanish. And that's where the systems begin. That's where the story begins. This is where those conditions that allow for that sort of stem from. And so the exhibit goes from the 1500s to the Ocoee Massacre. And we say, when does the legacy of this event end? It doesn't. It's still going on for the families and the descendants of those families that survived this. This is still very much a reality for them every day, in poverty and the loss of generational wealth, the generational trauma that's inflicted, right? And so we ended up with an exhibition, not about 2 nights in our Central Florida history, but an exhibition about 500 years of systems of oppression and all of the things that go with that in Central Florida, and how that relates on a more national scale. While we're starting to design this exhibit, we get shut down for the pandemic. Or is this even going to be an exhibition? Well, let's keep forging ahead. Many people don't realize, when the murder of George Floyd happened, we see this resurgence sort of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that movement actually happened here locally in Sanford, Florida, with the murder of Trayvon Martin years before. So when that happened, of course, we had that conversation. What needs to be collected? There's a local response, especially because it hits so close to home, though it's a national story. And so we had discussions about collecting. The items you see on the right are collected at some of our local protests. The image in the middle is it is cropped, and I apologize to my staff who took this amazing photograph, but she went down to one of the Black Lives Matter movement protests happening locally and took a photograph of this gentleman with the sign. Now, to most people, this wouldn't mean anything. But while we're designing the exhibit yesterday, this was home, July Perry is the name of the individual who was lynched 100 years ago in this massacre. And there's a young gentleman at this march 100 years later holding that sign. If that's not enough of a reason for us to be out on the streets with our community, seeing how their sort of relating what they're experiencing now to something that happened 100 years ago is just a really incredible moment to capture. But history kept happening while we were designing this exhibit. Honestly, down to the very hours before we opened the exhibit for our VIP reception, which was safely socially distanced, we were changing text panels because history was happening. The murder of George Floyd and we changed panels after we opened because of the election, because of new research that we found. Even things that kept happening, like Disney redesigning Splash Mountain and Daytona Beach. Those are both things inside of our collecting region. The Daytona Speedway and the Confederate flag and the noose and that whole story. We had to be nimble. We were saying we were doing an exhibit from enslavement up through today, but today just keeps changing and just keeps moving, and being able to give ourselves the space and the willingness to do that is extra work, but very important work. Down on the left, I will say that we also spent a lot of time during the pandemic trying to engage. These are all descendants of of Black individuals who were pushed out or murdered during the Ocoee Massacre. And some of them traveled to see the show, and some of them haven't been able to, but working with the people who've been living this history for many, many years is a very important part of creating change in your museum. We are not here to tell people their history. We are here to share it with them and how they've experienced it, etc. I'm not going to walk through each one of these. We've talked about some urgent response collecting, a lot of contemporary collecting. Now, contemporary collecting is not the only way to change your institution, right? And it's not without pros and cons. But one of the ways we found to prioritize change is in that constantly working with our community to collect their story. Collecting now has done so much for informing how we continue to collect the past and how we're moving forward in the role we play in our community. We're not just educators, right? We are here to inspire action and change. We don't have to tell people what that is. We can still inspire them to do something. Working with those communities, preserving their histories. There's just a lot of different things. In the case of Pulse, we really found ourselves being a source of great healing for our community, and that they could see that their story was going to be preserved in this experience that they had lived. These are all things, this is really from another presentation I did, but I placed it here because of the fact that these are all considerations to have in what we're doing in museums now. It's not just about contemporary collecting. It's really about change, generally speaking. A lot about safety. What decisions are we making right now that curators are going to love us or loathe us for in 50 or 100 years? We all look back at our collections and we're like, why? Why did they do that? So leave better notes about why you made the decisions. Some of these different things can divide staff. We all are of different backgrounds. We're of different generations. We're of different political views. And that's all okay. That's all got to be part of those conversations. It's okay for staff to disagree, but we all have to hear where each other's coming from and figuring out good paths for going forward. Everything's political. That's something they didn't teach me in school. I had no idea how political everything about museums and history really are. So wake up call, Pam. Again, I won't go through all of these, but they're all things that are difficult parts of our jobs. We can all agree that working with stakeholders and working with the community is way harder than just sitting in our office by ourselves writing text panels, right? But it's worth it a million times over. One of the last things I'll sort of share that I think is really important is serving your people. And that's inward and outward. In this case, these are all photos of the staff who've made these things happen. Our institution has more staff than this. This was a core group that worked on Pulse and has worked on several of these initiatives. They're the collections and exhibitions departments. That's not to say that our front of house staff is not as important. Our education's not doing programming. These just happen to be the photographs that I had in my arsenal. So one of the things we really have to think about in all the work that we do, history is traumatic. right? There's good parts, there's bad parts, and we see how difficult the last year has been. I mean, I think I've heard reporters use the word historic event more in the past year than I have in my entire life. And honestly, this is probably the first time I've agreed. Usually I'm like, ugh, you're misusing that word, just like people misuse the word curator, misusing the word historic. I mean, everything is technically history, right? But come on. So taking care of the staff and realizing that not only are we navigating work, we're navigating our personal lives. And those two things are not so separable. So after Pulse, going into Pulse rather, none of us were thinking about our own mental health. You know, we're thinking about the survivors, we're thinking about the families, we're thinking about those people who are most impacted. Later, actually doing an oral history with one of the trauma surgeons, something he said to me has always stuck with me. And he said, it's not a misery competition. It's not that one of us is more miserable than another. We're all going through what we're going through. And there's no need for a guilt complex. There's no need for dismissing our own pain over others, right? We're all entitled to our grief and our misery, and just have to support each other and figure out how to navigate that. And we just, at the beginning, we weren't thinking about it. And so we really quickly began to realize that we needed to make space for our staff to debrief together or separately, to make sure that they had the ability to go seek therapy if that is what they chose was right for them, but not forcing that on somebody, because those things are not always right for everyone. And we did a lot of other things, therapy pets, dogs. They also come in Shetland pony, by the way, if you didn't know that there's Shetland pony therapy pets now, to, you know, sort of keeping a secret that our staff was going to be honored with these sort of Pulse remembrance quilts for all the work that they've done, right down to eating at a place called Beefy King, or going out for a Turkish feast. There's a lot of different ways that healing and therapy can happen for a staff. And sometimes it's just not being steeped in the work that's most important. So really, you know, another side of serving our people is also considering our colleagues. We're all going through our own instances of tragedy or trauma, of contemporary events, of the pandemic, of connecting with communities. We all, you know, it's hard to sometimes connect with colleagues. But if you're somebody who has knowledge, please share that, you know, with another entity, or, you know, let SEMC know and help them, because that's what we do, right? They're a conduit between all of us to help us all grow. So we do try to pay it forward, all of the knowledge and what we've learned from hurricanes, from our trauma here with the Pulse nightclub shooting, how to, you know, even just a month after the Pulse nightclub shooting, we were working with staff and colleagues in Dallas about getting oral histories after the police shootings. And we've worked with most sites since. And what we do is we just reach out, and we just, after a mass tragedy happens, we just reach out to what we think is the appropriate place. And we say, hey, if, you know, we hope you're doing well, our thoughts are with you. If you choose to collect or want to do something with this event, you know, feel free to call on us if you think we can be of any help. You don't have to, right? You also don't have to collect. You have to decide what's right for your institution. But serving your people is not only serving your own staff, but it's also serving your colleagues and trying to help. The other thing, I guess, internally, I don't want to skip over to, is making sure that your staff is safe, not both mentally and emotionally, but also physically. All the topics that we just talked about, the Pulse nightclub shooting and issues of, you know, an LGBTQ history, the Ocoee Massacre, and talking about white supremacy and the Ku Klux Klan. We've also done history drives or exhibitions with our Jewish community, with again, our LGBTQ community, and all of these different topics in history that could actually make us a target for violence, right? So one of the discussions we have with our staff as we're navigating this, when we start to promote exhibitions that are on these topics that have some sort of a contentious or potentially violent side, we tell the staff that we're doing this. This is what you might run up against. If you see something, say something. You do not need to walk over to the parking garage by yourself at night. you know, we can have a security guard walk you, or before the sun goes down, go get your car and park it in the back, whatever that is. You know, these are not things we think about, I think, historically as museum professionals. Now individuals who've worked at, say, like Holocaust centers and things, this has always been a reality for them. But it's new to me. It was new to me coming here. I never thought about the fact that I could walk out of my museum and be a target of white supremacy simply for having done an exhibit on an event that happened 100 years ago. And it's nothing about choosing sides or biases in museums. Just simply stating that that is a thing that happened here locally is enough in the violent times that we really live in. And so making sure that your staff is aware. We've done, you know, active shooter training. We've done all sorts of different types of training that maybe weren't so present in our minds before the last 5 years. And so, you know, that's sort of a difficult note, but doing important work does come with some of those difficult things. And it's definitely, I don't think, a reason not to do it. So what has changed? I just took you through a whole lot of events that have happened to our staff that we've reacted in various ways to. Again, please do share some questions in the chat. You know, what has changed for us in 5 years through all of these things I just discussed, all of our experience as staff. This is us after we collected and helped to clean up one of the memorial sites after the Pulse nightclub shooting. You know, we still have to navigate politics. We still have to choose our words, our sponsors, our donors. We lost donors over Pulse. It's a reality of doing the work. We can't keep fostering those behaviors. Again, this is not, I'm not going to do a whole presentation on how we do or do not reflect, you know, biases and stuff. It's something we take very seriously in terms of our collection. We've actually made sure we've stopped and had conversations about, by doing or going to this event, what is the opposite to that? Is there an opposite to that? Do we need to go to that event and get photos or oral histories? Hey, you know, I'm going down to the anti, as an example, an anti-Trump rally. Should I take photos and ask for posters? Sure. I'll go to the pro-Trump rally and do the same. Regardless of our personal beliefs, we have a duty to collect all of history as it's happening, right? So we still have to not navigate those things. We're still short-staffed. Though when I started, our collections department was 2 people and it's now 10 people. We have a lot of room yet to grow. For the budget size of our museum, we should have double the staff that we do. We have about 25 staff. We're a few down due to the pandemic's terrible budgetary ramifications for our museum, just like everybody else. But, you know, those are the things we always hope for. In terms of the good, we have conversations every day about what's happening in the world, what's happening around us, what's important for us, what's going to be important in the future. And we have to decide about whether there's an action to take, yes, no, what, or when. It's just about constantly reflecting. Sometimes we can get bogged down in our backlog and not think about also progress forward. Now, of course, again, I'm going through all of this at a very top level. You know, there's questions about sustainability and resources, and we understand that, and I'm happy to talk more about that if people have questions specifically. But there are ways to keep working through that. We value everybody's opinion on our staff. We cannot always accept everybody's suggestions or recommendations, but we value it. And sometimes we're surprised, again, by where certain suggestions come from. The work we do is purpose-driven for both ourselves personally and for the community. And our strategic plan, while a guiding set of goals for 5 years, and they're written with a dream in mind, it's constantly edited to our new realities and our new opportunities. We've all seen in the past year that a strategic plan just isn't what it used to be in terms of long-term planning, right? 5 years right now is long. That's a long time to have picked a course and to stay on it, because there are always constantly new realities and opportunities opening for museums. And so the constant reevaluation of those priorities is really, really important. To round up and end, where are we today? In the past 5 years, we've now connected and done history drives with, but not limited to, our LGBTQ+ community, Latinx, Black, Japanese American, Vietnamese, Muslim, our Vietnamese refugees, our Vietnam veterans, cattle ranching families, descendants of families of the Ocoee Massacre. Each year, we look at different things that are going on and different ways to continue to diversify our collections and to do oral histories. Our board is 75% more diverse than it was 5 years ago. Our staff is not. That's something we continue to try to change, and we think about ways to do that. That's through hiring processes and where we list our positions. We're also creating endowed paid internship programs. We just listed our first women's history internship, which is a paid internship. That's new for us. We need to create better equitability between different individuals when it comes to socioeconomics, et cetera, to diversify our field and to bring new voices and new experiences in. We've been honored with 6 of the nation's top awards in museums in our industry. And our most recent exhibit on the Koi Massacre had over 5 million media impressions. It was featured in Smithsonian Magazine and Washington Post and Atlas Obscura. And so a lot has changed. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been mentioned in any of those publications. And it's not about being mentioned in them, it's the reasons for it. And it's because we're doing better work in our community. We're being nimble and we're adapting, and we're constantly in conversation about what is a museum and what can a museum do.
Thank you, Pam. That I love having the conversations with you because, again, your conviction, and you keep saying it's 5 years is a long time. In my experience, 5 years is not a long time in a museum to make as much change happen as you and your staff really have. And, you know, I love this type of dialogue and conversation. So I have questions of my own, but I'm gonna not be selfish and start with a few that are in the Q&A from our attendees. So for the first one, how have you navigated your own positionality as a professional historian curator, and often not intersectional with some of the communities with whom you've worked, but wanting to serve the needs of individuals as well as larger audiences who may or may not be sympathetic to the stories you're hoping or wanting to tell?
Let me wrap my brain around that question a minute. Help me break that down, Zinnia. You know, in terms of what that's asking directly.
Your positionality as a professional. Oh, Adina, let's see if I can, maybe I can figure out how to make, hold on a second, Adina. I think I can figure out how to make you, bring you in as an audio question.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Learning something every day here.
Well, okay.
Oh,
let me, okay, there we go.
Okay. Okay, Adina, take it away.
If you unmute, you can probably. Oh, don't bring in his audio. Okay, let me try to answer that and you can tell me if I'm headed in the right direction. How about that? So, you know, I think I honestly, I'm not reflected for most of my communities. I am a middle-class straight white girl from the Midwest, from Iowa. So I've got some things happening. I got other things not happening. It's really hard to connect with communities that you don't look like, communities that have not historically been represented by your institution. I mean, that was the reality when I came. You know, even going to the exhibits, the way it talked about some of our communities, I'm like, did you ask them about this? Like, you know, like I don't, you know, and again, the way we speak has changed a lot in the last 5 years. There's been so much talk in the past year about, you know, how individuals would like to be identified. Now that comes down to a lot of different factors, right? In these sort of human first positioning in museums, right? We don't talk about slaves. We talk about individuals who have previously or were enslaved. We don't talk about disabled people. We say there is an individual who has a specific need or who has a disability. We talk about all sorts of different factors. And of course, with history, like racial identifiers are really difficult because they've sort of changed throughout time and people have different feelings about those. So, when we start to talk about those stories, that's why it's important to connect with those communities and do the work with them. So in the case of Ocoee, we looked at our staff and we're not a diverse staff. What business do we have or what role do we play? Now we've got the museum and that's important. We have walls to put this history on. And there is no, maybe not a similar situation for individuals more impacted by this. So what we did is we have an advisory council and we reached out to different people of all different backgrounds and we said, hey, we're not a diverse staff. We want to make sure we have different perspectives. We want to make sure that we're doing this right. We choose the right words and that we're really accurately reflecting the story and this experience. And that's how we navigated it. We had monthly meetings to discuss that. And sometimes it was about these, where does a photo go? Is it important to have this photo first or this photo first? Or is it important to represent it in this way? Or is this even what happened? So there's a lot of different ways to work through that. It's hard. Spencer Crew, who is a museum legend, of course, just did a presentation. I'll try to share with Zinnia the link to that. But he talked about the fact that just because you're a white person, doesn't mean you shouldn't be part of doing this good work, but sometimes that can be hard to do. And I think that's the way that I attack it, is the fact that I can't help that I am white, but I can help what I say and what I do and who I work with. And though, our staff's not very diverse, it's something we continue to work on too. So I don't know if that helps, or, feel free to clarify if I didn't quite hit the nail on the head there, but it's not easy.
I think you generally got to where Adina was going with that question. So here is another one. Can you talk about the history drives you've mentioned and how they work?
In different ways. So we've done like what we call a history harvest, where we just put out a social media call. Who has memories of Disney when it first opened, right? The 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World is coming up in October. So who has them, and then when people comment, we call them, we say, hey, do you have photos? Do you want to do an oral history? And it's just sort of organic. Word of mouth is your best bet. 1,000,000 times over. You meet one person and they're a gateway to so many other people. And that's what we've sort of found, the cattle ranching. We have all these longtime families and we just met one person. They're like, hey, come speak to the Cattle Ranchers Association. And I'm like, okay. And then it was just this sort of entry into all of this other stuff. So it happens in different ways. We've done where pre-pandemic, we just had a day where people could come for 4 hours and just bring their photos. We would line up times for oral histories on a specific topic. We just have like 4 or 5 staff with scanners, just like going to town. We can keep the originals or we can keep the digitals and whatever, we've got all that. And I'm happy to share some of what that looks like. We've gone to places and communities where mobility is possibly an issue. And done that as well. But like in the case of we did an exhibit called Leaving Vietnam, and it was a juxtaposition of Vietnamese refugees. We had a lot of military bases here. And so we have a large Vietnamese population after the war, but we also have a lot of Vietnam veterans. And so we had both of those stories sort of laced going through this exhibition. We've never had any relationship with our local Vietnamese refugees. So how do we get the in? How do we start to talk to them about a history harvest? Well, you know what? I love food. And there is a Vietnamese food blogger and vlogger. I don't know what that means, but video things, I don't know. I'm not hip. That I follow. And I'm like, you know what? I've commented on some of his stuff. I'm just going to reach out. So I said, hey, Ricky, this is what we want to do. We don't have trust built. We want to change that. We want to build and preserve your community's story. And he said, I'm in. So he started introducing us to restaurateurs in the area. We also got to eat a lot of Vietnamese food, which was awesome. But also he got us in with the different spiritual leaders in that community. And it just, the floodgates. And so we ended up doing oral histories. And then our next problem was, well, how do we get an interpreter? None of us, speak the language. And it was our first bilingual exhibition that was in Vietnamese and English. And so you can get entry in a lot of different ways, but don't let the fact that you've never done the work be the reason you keep doing it, right? You just have to consider the avenues and how to be respectful in going there. So, again, we've done it on social media. We've just done it through a random person we know. Let's just try to mobilize. And, we've gone to a community's meetings, and we've literally just invited people to the museum to sit at a scanner with us and talk. So it can be done a lot of ways.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, you have to start somewhere. And I think coming at it with genuine interest in the topic, as opposed to, well, we're doing this exhibition and we need voices, and it's a different approach. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about your internal staffing and how you've navigated over the last 5 years, because I think this is really interesting. You talked several times about leveraging the connections of staff and who they know and what they do. How do you do that? I mean, do you have, when something happens, do you bring your staff together? Is it a regular meeting that you have to kind of touch base, or internally, how do you operate?
It's easier now that I'm the director. Previously, calling all staff meetings wasn't a thing. We were really siloed as an institution. It was like, education is here, collections, exhibits and collections don't play together. It was just like very burp, 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 burp. And it was annoying and obnoxious when I came. I'm just like, you didn't talk to that person about a thing? And they're like, no, we don't do that. So I'm sorry if anybody out there's institutions are siloed, stop it. We have to be a connective whole. We all have to respect what each of us bring to the table, because the world is too difficult a place for any nonprofit or museum to exist if we're not unified even within our own walls. And so it was hard and it was painful. Like, I would seriously go down and just pop into education's office and be like, hi, how's it going? And they're like, who are you and why are you talking to us? Like, that's literally how bad it was. It was a result of a lot of bureaucracy and personalities over the years. And we just weren't having it anymore. And so, we started bringing people together, and a lot of it was just us infiltrating, right? So I had control of the collections and management of the collections and exhibits department. So first I had to bring them together, and I just forced it. It was like, y'all are going to sit in a room and talk about how do you design an exhibit without both of those teams? We did. That's why we brought in traveling exhibits, because those groups refused to play together. And so I said, we're designing an exhibit. Y'all have to talk. And because we had so much new staff, it was actually relatively easy, because people were like, oh, this is just how this place works. And it hadn't been. So we really started breaking down that way. But now something that we've really implemented is this sounds so dumb because like, what, right? Shouldn't you have been doing that? We do a monthly all hands meeting. And the first thing we start with is kudos. Everybody come share the good things you've heard. And you can also share the ugly things you've heard so we can make sure we address them. But it just starts with everybody knowing who's in the room. There was one time I went like 4 meetings and I didn't even know who the new girl in education was. That's, and it's an unfortunate reality for a lot of museums that we just allow this to be the case. So in our all hands meeting, we have our, kudos, we have, actual agenda items, important things. And then there's always a topic for conversation. And it's, hey, who has an idea about a good program for mythic creatures? Or, this is something collections would like to do. Does anybody have any ideas or know anybody?
Uh-oh.
With so-and-so, this event just happened. Does anybody know anybody? You know what? My cousin mows the lawn for a guy who knows that barber. Great. Put us in contact, right? And our volunteers too. We do not mine our volunteers enough for their skill sets that they actually have. Like, now, how many people know what the day job of your older volunteers were? Most people don't seem to know that. And it's like, oh, you ran a digitization company? Cool, let's talk about that. But they also know a lot of people. right? Like our relationships are sort of exponential, a tree in that way. So just ask, and it's not, you're not asking someone to speak on your behalf. I know that that's scary in a bureaucracy. It's like, well, we don't want our volunteers, blah, blah. Just say who. I'm not asking you to speak to anybody. I'm just asking you to let me know. And then we'll talk about how we can make a connection and how that happens, because yeah, things can get out of control with that too. I get it. But those are all different ways we've sort of changed our communication and how we work together, to be able to tap into some of that. And it's just constantly having conversations. Some of your most productive work is, quite frankly, at the water cooler.
I know, and now in the Zoom boxes, though, that has made it difficult to keep those connections in some ways.
So we started doing, for our Zoom calls, because everybody hates Zoom, we started doing some icebreakers. And so our meetings have like a 5 or 6 minute icebreaker at the beginning. And the icebreaker is always something that just sort of prompts conversation. It kind of gets the wiggles out, right? Again, it gets people just into the meeting. And that's not for every meeting, but for these bigger ones. But it also, the way we write the icebreakers, or like find them, is to let us all get to know a little bit more about each other. Oh, Zinnia, I didn't know you were an artisan bread maker. That's really fascinating. Well, guess what? We're going to be doing an exhibit about bread. And now I know that, right? So always be building your toolkit, through those conversations. I think Zoom has allowed us to get to know our staff better. My staff have met my dogs now. You guys are lucky you haven't met them yet. You see the kids running around in the background. You say, hey, I really love that painting on your wall. It's really given us a different personal look. And I think in a positive way. I know that sometimes there's this barrier and professional and personal, but, I think it's all taught us a different way to interact.
It's very true. All right, I'm watching our time here. I haven't seen any other questions come in, but I have 2 more.
Well, hold on.
Actually, I have like.
I was going to say, Angie, I see that you're from Boone. Nobody's from Boone or knows anything about Boone. You and me together. That's all I'll say. I was there for about 4 years, and then a lot has changed since
Angie,
then.
I've seen you twice today. Thank you for making that comment. That is one nice thing about Zoom, to be able to see somebody in, Florida and Arkansas 2 different times in one day. It's great. I guess one of my questions, and you and I talked about this when we were preparing, so much of what we're all doing these days has been reactive to events. Should we make a statement? What should we do? Whereas it sounds as though within Orange County Regional History Center, when something happens now, like I'll just say the Capitol insurrection, what happens internally? Because it's like when something big like that happens, as opposed to coming to the office the next day and everybody saying, well, what should we do? Am I right in assuming that there is now, what you're going to do?
I wouldn't say that we know what we're going to do, because every situation is different.
Okay.
So the Capitol insurrection, we were in an exhibits meeting. We were having like a hardcore breakdown design meeting for our Pulse 5-year remembrance. And one of my staff's face just went blank. And I go, are you okay? What's going on? And they're like, look at the news. They had just gotten a message from a friend on their cell phone.
Yeah.
And so we all look at our phones and we're like, whoa, we just couldn't say anything. Like, we just all checked out of the meeting for 5 minutes. And what does this mean for us? Right. And for us personally, it was just like, we just need to like deal with it, see it. I don't know what the word is. Like, we just need to be part of what's happening for a few minutes. Mm-hmm. But then, yeah, the next question out of our mouths is there a connection to us? Well, like, I think like 24 of the people in the insurrection were from Florida. So yeah, probably, Florida man is a very real thing. Not to make light of that. That's not what I mean to do, but just saying that there's often a connection. And so it's, it's just somebody speaks first, but it's almost always on all of our minds. Is there a connection? What's the connection? Is it important? Should we do it? These are all the different types of things that we just start to starts to filter through right away. And in almost every one of these events, it's somebody different on the staff that gets there first, right? Who's the first Slack message? Who's the first Slack link? Who sends the first meme or GIF or whatever that's like ridiculous about something? In the case of something like less severe, of course, as the insurrection. So it happens for us in a lot of different ways. The fact is that it's not just me saying, staff, this is what we're doing. It's different people. We all have this mindset that what's happening today is as important as what happened 100 years ago. So what are we doing with it, right? And we don't all have infinite resources, right? And I recognize that, but it doesn't cost you much to sit down and have a conversation about what, if, how, when.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what, if, how, when, a conversation. It starts somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my final question, and this one, I don't know what you're going to do with this one.
Great. Wait.
Well, do you feel your academic training as a curator adequately prepared you for the projects you have undertaken at the Orange County Regional History Center over the last 5 years? That's the first part of the question.
Girl, no. Like, no.
Well, and then the next part is, beyond conviction and passion for truth, knowledge, and preserving all stories, how can future curators or collections professionals be trained to deal with these kinds of difficult topics and events? Or I guess not how, but like, what would your...
I started in museums when I was 14 years old. Tiny little Jackson County Historical Society in Maquoketa, Iowa. And I learned from somebody who, I don't even know what she had done before. She didn't have a museum professions degree, right? She hadn't been a curator at some prestigious institution. She was Bonnie, and she was the director of the Jackson County Historical Society, and she was incredible. And I learned so much from her. And throughout my years and the many interns, I mean, I was a career intern, for how long? Because I started so early. Some of the best experience I had was in what not to do. And I've carried that forward, and eventually I decided I wanted to go get a master's because I wanted to make sure that I had the theory to go with the experience. And quite frankly, the theory is only complementary to what's lived. But I mean, I think back to my master's degree, and I loved my program at Seton Hall, and I loved many, not all, of my professors. And some of the things I learned were so useful, but like, nobody taught me how to read a budget. Nobody told me what it was like to work with board members. Those are basic museum things, let alone these things that are really hard and different and changing, right? Nobody taught me how to face somebody at a memorial site when they walk up and they pull up their shirt and show you their bullet wounds and ask if you'd like to touch them. Nobody teaches you that. Nobody says, if a family invites me to their house at 11 p.m. on a Friday night for a pizza, when they're comfortable to do the oral history about their son that was murdered, nobody told me that, right? Nobody's talked to us about how to deal with a global event, a pandemic, and how it impacts your staff both so deeply personally and professionally at the same time. No, nobody ever taught us any of that. And so we have to use our knowledge and our intuition. And I think in terms of training, it's more conversation, right? It's bridging that gap, I think, a little bit between personal and professional. We've heard for a long time about how we should separate those things, and they should be separate. I don't think that's how the world can be in most situations anymore, right? Like, I think a lot of museum professionals, it is both, it's a part of them, no matter what seat they're in, whether it's their couch or their office chair. We're always constantly ticking and thinking about that worldview. So, I mean, things like this, just learning from others' experiences. I think that, kind of popping into some of these types of conversations is sometimes the most beneficial, because you just don't know what you don't know. And that's the biggest thing with some of these emergencies. You can write an emergency plan, but if it doesn't fit the bill of what happened. So, using our colleagues and, I have a lot of ideas about a new age museum professions study course. And I can tell you that my classes would look nothing like the ones I took at Seton Hall. Again, I love some of them, love some of those professors, not others. But the reality is, we're learning theory, what a museum should be, but that's it's not a one size fits all. It's different for every community and every place, and the way we can serve our community is different too. That's a really long answer to what should be a very simple question, but I think it's because it's not simple. There's not always a good way to learn. And that's, you know, in an instance where if a mass shooting happens somewhere, the next day I just send an email and I just say, hey, we're thinking of you and we're with you. And if you need something, we've been there. You know, they didn't know to contact us, but we just went ahead and let them know that if there's something that they're navigating and we can be of assistance, you know. So that's one thing we're trying to do to help. But SCMC, if they want to start a whole new museum profession study program, I'm there for it. And budgeting and board members are two of the top things on the list. Right? And those aren't even emergencies. They aren't even emergencies, but they're hard and it's ever changing. So.
And I think that's a good place to end with the acknowledgement that we are in the midst of great change right now, but I continue to really see the value in these conversations and want to thank you personally for all the work you've done in terms of reaching out to other museums and communities that find themselves in a similar situation as you were in 2016 with Pulse, because knowing now that there is a Pam Schwartz out there that somebody can contact for information and support. And I've said to you before, you the personal professional there, you give a lot. And I know that, and I'm so appreciative and I'm so thankful for your time and that you did this for us. Really great. Just, again, I always think it's important to have something to grab onto, some positive momentum, and watching what other institutions are doing, not always easily, and sometimes in the face of great pushback. And I know that you've navigated that as well. So
it's been painful. You can ask my mom. I think she's actually on this program. She gets my crying phone calls sometimes, you know, and my angry phone calls, right?
Well, I just think being able to acknowledge that, though, for all of us who really committed to the work, that it's not easy. And you said at the beginning, commitment, conviction, and courage. So I think we will end there. And thank you, Pam, for doing this for us. Thank you for everyone who stayed on today and for great questions.
And, you know, our door's open. There's a way that we can help you or help your institution, please do not hesitate to reach out. We all owe it to one another to try to help. And a big thank you to SCMC for all you do in bringing us together. I thank you for all the hard work all of you are doing and your perseverance throughout the most recent pandemic. And I can't thank my staff at the History Center enough for being incredible and inspiring individuals that they are. So.
All right, it's great. Thank you, Pam. Bye, everybody. We'll see you again soon.